everyone, and welcome back. Today we are going to be going over the case of Peg Entwistle and her suicide off the Hollywood land sign in 1932. On September 16th, 1932, a young actress stood on top of the H in the Hollywood land sign and took a last look over the glittering city which had rejected her. Taking a deep breath, she jumped, making her mark on Hollywood history forever, but in the most tragic way possible. Millicent Lillian Entwistle was born on February 5th, 1908, in Wales, to English parents Emily and Robert Entwistle. She spent her early childhood in West London. Millicent's parents divorced when she was just 2 years old, although it is commonly misreported that her mother died. By 1913, she had moved to America, sailing on the SS Philadelphia with her father. She settled in New York City when she arrived, and it was during this time that her father actually worked as an actor. Tragically, Peg's father died in 1922 when he was hit by a motorist on 72nd Street and Broadway. It was at this time Peg and her two half-brothers were taken in by her uncle, Walter Hampton, a stage manager and actor who lived in New York. Peg followed in her father's footsteps and decided to become an actress. In 1925, Peg moved to Boston to study at the Henry Jewett Repertory. Her uncle gave Peg an uncredited role in the Broadway production of Hamlet, where she carried the King's train and brought in the poison cup. It was later that year Peg was cast in the Henrik Ibsen production of The Wild Duck as the character of Hedvig. It was said at that time future actress Bette Davis saw her in a production, and it was that show which inspired Bette to become an actress. Davis eventually played the same role herself several years later. A year later, Peg was recruited by the New York Theatre Guild and was provided with her first credited role on Broadway. She played Martha in The Man from Toronto. The show ran for 28 performances before closing. Entwistle performed in 10 Broadway shows between 1926 and 1932. Her longest show was Tommy, which ran for 232 performances in 1927. This was also the year she married fellow actor Robert Keith at the New York City clerk's office. 2 years later, they would end up divorced. Peg would claim grounds of cruelty, but also said that her husband had failed to tell her that he had been married before and also had a son from that previous marriage. In 1927, she was in the show The Uninvited Guest, although it closed after just 7 performances. Peg was noted as the only good part of the production. During the time between shows, Peg also toured with the Theatre Guild, playing a variety of different characters each week. It was this work which gave her some added publicity from the New York Times and the Oakland Tribune. Peg, however, was rarely given an opportunity to show off her dramatic acting talent. She was frequently cast in light comedic roles. Of these parts, Peg said, "I would rather play roles that carry conviction. Maybe it is because they are the easiest and yet the hardest things for me to do. To play any kind of an emotional scene, I must work up to a certain pitch. If I reach this in my first word, the rest of the words and lines take care of themselves. But if I fail, I have to build up the balance of the speeches, and in doing this, the whole characterization falls flat. I feel like I am cheating myself. I don't know whether other actresses get the same reaction or not, but it does worry me." In 1932, Peg would make her last appearance on Broadway with the show Alice Sit by the Fire. The show was canceled early on in its run and left the actors with just 1 week's pay, rather than a percentage of the box office gross, which had been the original agreement. May 1932 was deep in the Depression, and by that time Peg had relocated to Los Angeles to work in the play The Mad Hopes at the Belasco Theater in downtown LA. The show only ran 2 weeks, and it was reviewed by the Los Angeles Examiner. Belasco and Curran have staged the new play most effectively and have endowed this Romney-Brent opus with every distinction of cast and direction. Producer Bella Blau has developed the comedy to its highest points, costumes and settings are of delightful quality, and every detail makes the production one entirely fit for its translation to the New York stage. In the cast, Peg Entwistle and Humphrey Bogart hold first place in supporting the star, Billy Burke, and both give fine, serious performances. Miss Entwistle as the earnest young daughter, Geneva Hope, of the vague mother, and presents a charming picture of youth. After the play closed, Peg won what would be the only film credited to her name at Radio Pictures, later known as RKO. 13 Women, starring Myrna Loy and Irene Dunne. Peg had a small role of Hazel Cousins. Unfortunately, Peg would not live to see the film premiered in theaters. The film was both a critical and commercial flop at the time. Entwistle was let go of her RKO contract with no money and no backup plan. On September 18, 1932, a woman was hiking in the hills near the Hollywoodland sign, and she found shoes, a purse, and a jacket on the ground. She also saw there was a suicide note included. Looking around the mountains, she soon saw a woman's body below, and the hiker reported her discovery to the Los Angeles police. When they arrived at the scene and recovered the body, they realized the suicide note only was signed with the initials P.E., so they were unable to inform any family of their discovery. The unidentified woman's note was published in local papers, hoping that her family might come forward. I am afraid. I am a coward. I am sorry for everything. If I had done this a long time ago, it would have saved a lot of pain. P.E. A man did respond to the paper. His niece had gone missing 2 days earlier after saying she was taking a walk to a local drugstore and then to see some friends. Police later surmised that instead of going to the store, Peg had wandered to the southern slope of Mount Lee and then climbed the 50-foot workman's ladder up the H of the Hollywoodland sign. The body, when examined by the coroner, had multiple fractures of the pelvis consistent with a fall. Of her death, her uncle said, "Although she never confided her grief to me, I was somehow aware that she was suffering intense mental anguish. It is a great shock to me that she gave up the fight as she did." He later recalled that after her option was dropped, Peg had tried desperately to raise the train fare to go home to New York, but could not secure a loan. Her dramatic suicide was highly publicized during the time, and her funeral was held in Hollywood before her body was cremated and sent to Ohio to be interred next to her father. In a sad irony befitting of Hollywood, a letter arrived at her uncle's home shortly after Peg's death, and it was postmarked for the day before Peg had committed suicide. It was an offer from the Beverly Hills Playhouse, offering Peg the lead in their next production, about a woman who commits suicide.